Nearly 4,000 residents have been evacuated from their homes in Iceland as officials believe a volcanic eruption in the country's southwestern peninsula may be imminent. Joining us now for an expert take is Professor Paul Ashwell from the University of Toronto. Thanks for joining us today, Professor. Now, we've heard about volcanic eruptions happening in Iceland before. I'm wondering what sets this one that's going to happen potentially apart.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of similarities to what we've seen before, but there are a few things that would be different. Number one is the potential size of this eruption. The current modeling is that the amount of magma that's below the surface could be potentially much larger than we've seen in previous eruptions close by. And of course, the fact that this is much closer to a fairly large town of Grindavik in Iceland, it means it's going to have a far greater impact on the local population than previous eruptions.
I want to talk about timing here. Now, on Sunday, scientists at the Icelandic Meteorological Office reported the flow of magma moving closer to the surface. Now, does that indicate that we're getting closer to an eruption?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the last I read was that the magma was about maybe 800 meters below the surface, which is incredibly shallow point for magma. And by that point, it's definitely not a certainty that the magma is going to erupt through the surface. It does still need a little bit of time to get there, but it's probably building in volume below the surface, and it wouldn't take that much more effort for that magma to be able to rise up to the surface and start erupting.
Now, forgive me, but when I was about 6 years old and I would draw a picture of a volcano, I'm thinking of a bit of a mountain with some smoke coming out on top. These images that we're seeing out of Iceland are different. So how is this volcano different than that one I drew when I was a child?
So the one that you're thinking of when you draw as a child is the classic, what we call stratovolcano, where the big sort of cone-shaped mountain, and that forms in certain places around the world where the plate tectonics allows it to. Iceland, however, is kind of a bit of an unusual place. In Iceland, the two parts of the Iceland, that literally the east and west of the country, are pulling apart. And as it does so, magma is able to rise up from below and is able to erupt at the surface. And so as a result of this, it never really forms these huge mountains that you might expect, especially in the area where the magma is currently building up. And that's just purely because the ground is pulling apart and never able to build up into these big volcanoes.
As an expert in this field, when you started to hear about all of this activity happening in Iceland, I wonder what your first reaction was.
Well, when I first was hearing about it, I was quite excited, to be honest, because if it does erupt, it's going to be probably a very beautiful eruption. We're talking fire fountains of magma coming out from the ground, these wonderful fissures. And then I sort of looked into it and saw where the magma was currently building up, where the earthquakes were. And it being so close to a town with a lot of people living in, being close to infrastructure and things like that, that sort of excitement did turn to a little bit of dread, because if it does erupt, there's a lot of people's houses that could be at risk of being destroyed. So I'm kind of caught between two different things of potentially a lot of really good information is going to come out of an eruption like this in terms of magma processes, where it comes up and all these sorts of things. But then on the other side, there's also a significant risk of loss of property and infrastructure damage.
Yeah, so people live there, and it's also a popular travel destination. So what should tourists keep in mind about this?
I think for the moment that the risk to sort of tourism of the area is fairly minimal. Well, there's obviously an evacuation zone, and tourists would not be able to go to Grindavik and the nearby Blue Lagoon, which is a popular tourist destination. But in terms of the actual risk, if you've got a holiday booked in Iceland over the next couple of weeks, the risk is pretty minimal. There was an eruption very close by at Evacuations, and it didn't really have any impact on flights coming in and out of Reykjavik airport or any sort of wider impact on tourism. So if I had a holiday booked in Iceland, I wouldn't be too concerned at the moment, but certainly it's going to be very good to keep monitoring what's going on.
We're talking about magma, stuff happening below the Earth's surface. But does climate change play a role in any of this?
It's probably unlikely that climate change is impacting this volcano. We don't really know what the impact on volcanoes will be of climate change. There's more likely to be an impact on certain volcanoes that have a lot of ice on top of them. So there's volcanoes, for example, in Antarctica. And those volcanoes, with that ice is removed, that weight of the ice is removed from that volcano, that could lead to changes in the behavior of the volcano. And there are other volcanoes on Iceland that have also large glaciers which may also be impacted by the loss of that ice and loss of that weight through climate change. This one, however, very unlikely that this is going to be changed or has been changed by climate change at all in terms of how big it's going to be or how more frequent they're going to be. It's only going to be very specific volcanoes that are impacted by that.
And something else you mentioned too was that you're kind of curious, if this eruption does happen, you might be able to learn something. I wonder what kind of lessons you could potentially be taking away from this.
Well, there's all sorts of things. So the big one at the moment is sort of connecting the signals that we're seeing below the surface to what will happen in the future, right? We're always trying to be able to better predict where and when and how big an eruption will be. And so we're recording all of these earthquakes that are happening below the surface, and that will lead to just better information, better predictions of how and where and when volcanoes will erupt if they have these precursor activities. So that's probably the biggest benefit to the field of the science, at least. And then we're also going to be looking at, how this interacts with infrastructure. What are the best ways to protect infrastructure? Is there ways that we can protect infrastructure during an eruption like this? So there's so many different things that we could bring out of an eruption like this, so positive things that we could have.
Fascinating stuff. That's Professor Paul Ashwell from the University of Toronto. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.